Hello, request video. What do I think about the Spartacus, the television show? I was thinking about doing these kinds of videos anyways for historical TV shows to talk about them and historical movies because a lot of historical movies, in fact, most historical movies, they totally butcher what really happened, and more so in the past. And it's been getting better as time goes on, but it'll eventually get to the point where people get smart enough where I think historical movies, they won't change anything at all. And Spartacus is has an interesting mix of making a television show, of taking liberties with reality, but then including a lot of reality in there. And I think it was a brilliant job. I was a Spartacus fanatic. I've never been as much of a fanatic about a TV show as I was about Spartacus. And the funny thing is, the very first beginning of the first episode I saw, I stopped it, like, I think it was on like Netflix, like when it first came out, and I could have seen it, and I just stopped watching it after like the first 5 minutes because of the first episode, because the writing was just so cheesy. But writing I think is cheesy in movies and television shows anyway. Like, if I were to read the script of most TVs or television shows, it's like a 4-year-old wrote it, or it just seemed, I'd be embarrassed to read it, or embarrassed for the people who wrote it. But the fact of the matter is that, that's what, like, I guess script writing for television shows and stuff is all about. It's just, you just keep it simple and, cheesy, and the actors have a great way of making it sound cool. And like in the very episode, they were just being macho, like, me, I kick your ass, bad, and then they're fighting. But I think it was a great mix because of just what's the word I'm looking for? Fantastical, showy showmanship and reality. And I mean, obviously, it wasn't that realistic because they made them all out to be like superheroes, like when they escaped, Crixus pushes him up with a shield, and Spartacus jumps like 15 feet in the air, and then they can, when they stick their swords in people's heads, it comes out their mouth, it just goes in. And like one woman did that to a guy, the Silesian pirate. It was like a red hot iron, and it went through his head and out his mouth, and it wasn't even sharp, it had to go through his skull and that kind of stuff. It's not realistic, but that's I think it's cool to take liberties for that, because you have to appeal to the lowest common denominator. And I think at the end they did a pretty good job of making it historically accurate enough. They did stay true to the storyline pretty well. Just to lay out some of the differences between reality and how it really happened was, the Capua there's no mountains in Capua. In the television show, they had their ludus up on the top of this big mountain on the edge of a cliff, and Capua is just in the plains, like with Mount Vesuvius off in the distance. And what else? Now, one thing that I didn't like, that if I was the creator, I would have changed, because it would have made the show a lot more. It would have helped people realize how stuff really was in the past, and that's how different races looked differently. For example, Gannicus and Crixus were Gauls. Now, back in those days, in the BCs, Gauls were related to the Germans. Gauls were basically Germans who were farmers, kind of like civilized Germans, kind of like, in terms of civilization, closer to the Italians, but kind of like between Italians and Germans, but they were tall, blonde people. So, and Crixus, the guy who played Crixus, Manu Benet, he's like a short, I guess 5'10", but compared to the other actors, like a short, dark-haired, hairy guy, So they should have gotten like a 6'4", blonde, blue-eyed guy to play the Gauls, and all the Gauls, like Dusty Clare, the guy who played Gannicus, wasn't tall or blonde either. So I think that would have been cool. Just make sure all the Gauls and the Germans are tall and blonde and blue-eyed, and all the Germans are like darker skinned hairier, shorter, and yeah. Now, one thing that kind of bugged me a little bit about it that I just kept thinking over my head is the character. Oh man, Crixus's girlfriend. Navia. Well, she was a house slave, so she was born and raised in that ludus. So, you know, you know how they call him the house nigger, the Samuel Jackson's character. You know, those guys. I mean, they all supported slavery, and they just kissed the ass of their masters. And I mean, she was out there soaking in the hot tub and eating all the food and stuff. So I don't think she would have been so pissed off at Romans. You know, she would have. She wouldn't have wanted to partake in that at all. And then they had her go to the mines, and then after they get her out of the mines, within like, I guess the next year or whatever, she's kicking all the Romans' asses, you know, herself with a sword. And that was too much for me. That wasn't realistic. They should have had her shooting arrows like Mira was. But I think it was cool that they had some women kick ass over the guys, because I think back in those days, the women, like the Celtic and the German women could kick ass over the Roman guys, but because they were bigger, not because, because I think the Romans generally said like Germans were generally 6 inches taller than the Romans, which means that, say, a German woman would be about as tall as a Roman, but I think in some tribes even bigger. So that would have been cool to have like a big 6'5" blonde, buff blonde girl actress there, like fighting him and beating him. That would have been cool. But just having like Saxa, like his little girl, and she's got 2 knives and she's kicking all the Romans' asses. That was a little bit too much for me, but that was cool that they included them. And Enemaus, the real Enemaus was, I think he was a Gaul too, so he wasn't black. They had that guy, what was his name? Peter Mensa play him. Now, I don't even know if they had any black people. In all of those movies, they've always got their share of their token black guys and all those black dudes. For example, the pirate, the Silesian pirate, Blessing, whatever, he was Silesian, but Silesia is like modern day, like Ukraine or something, like somewhere in that area. So those are white people. He wasn't black. And black is sub-Saharan. I don't think Rome knew about sub-Saharan black people. For example, Herodotus' histories, he lived in the 5th century BC. He wrote about black people. They went down there and hung out with black people. They knew about them, but I don't think they did training. They knew about them enough to actually bring them back and have them intermingling with them. They did some, I guess, mating, and that's why people in the Middle East are kind of darker skinned. But anyways, but yeah, as far as what happened, the general gist of what happened in Spartacus was pretty realistic. In real life, when the slaves broke out, it was 70 slaves, and that's kind of how they portrayed it in the show. When Crixus fought, he had about 30,000 people, and when Spartacus had his final battle, they had about 70,000 people. So the sizes of the armies was pretty much realistic. Them marauding through towns and stuff was pretty much realistic. All that stuff. The episode where where the Romans made that big trench and had them blocked in the mountains. Well, that did happen, but it wasn't in the mountains. They were actually blocked in the southern tip of the boot of Italy, where they made a big trench across that really thin peninsula. So that was real. It was just at a different location. And then I think, Spartacus did some kind of trick and they escaped. So that was kind of similar. Being double-crossed by the pirates, the Silesian pirates, that did happen. In real life, Spartacus tried to get to Sicily to start a slave revolt there. And the Silesian pirates took their money and took off and didn't pay him. So that part was realistic. The decimation, where the Crassus had the guys stone 1 in every 10 of the guys because they were defeated by Spartacus. because he was told not to engage Spartacus and they engaged anyway and lost. That was real. Then Spartacus being trapped on the top of Mount Vesuvius and then rappelling down the cliffs on vines and then killing, what was that guy? I can't remember his name, but yeah, and all of his guys. That was real. So yeah, a lot of it, you know, and in the order of events, it was pretty realistic too. So it was good enough. It was realistic enough. So yeah, I thought it was great. I really liked the actor, Andy Whitfield, the first Spartacus actor who died of cancer. He did a really great job of just wanting to be free. All he wanted to do is be free, and you know, and get his wife back and everything, and that was great. And then when they got the new guy, what was his name? I can't remember his name, but I thought he was good too. But he was. I don't know if he would have done as a convincing of a job as Andy Whitfield when he was captured, because Andy Whitfield did a good job just being pissed off, and that guy was kind of a nice guy, so he was good. He did a good job of kind of being the good leader, and that's how Spartacus was in real life. He was, you know, tried to be fair to all of his followers and to free slaves and to start the slave revolt. You know, it's interesting that 2,000 years later, the people who we all remember and revere as Spartacus. You know, it isn't Crassus, even though Crassus was one of the big, you know, famous Romans in his own right. He was the one who later on went to the Middle East and fought the who were they? My brain is farting all over today. I need to get some exercise. But yeah, he died with his son. So in the TV show, they had his son killed, but in real life, his son died with him in a battle in Syria against those Middle Easterners. And in real life, Crassus, also the son, he fought along Julius Caesar in the Gallic Wars. In real life, Julius Caesar had no part in the Third Servile War with Spartacus, but he was about that age. Julius Caesar was born 100 BC, died 44 BC. The Servile Wars were like 73 to 71 BC, so he was about 25 years old during that time. But Julius Caesar didn't see his first battle until he was 40, which kind of makes him a really impressive person because he was one of the best generals ever. So I think they did a great job. I mean, I couldn't have done a better job. And the actors did a great job and everything. It was really cool. I liked all the nudity to it. I remember when I was in Sacramento and I got into it and I was getting them from the Blockbuster. The guy's like, "Oh, this is like softcore porn," and yeah, and nudity all the time. And that's how the Romans were in those days. They were having orgies and having sex with everybody, you know, and screwing the slaves and all that kind of stuff. And all of the double crossing, the political intrigue was realistic. I mean, was real. I don't know, you know, the stories weren't real, but just how they would all do that kind of stuff, that's how they were. I mean, they did a great job of portraying how people were in those days and how they acted. You know, like if we were to show the Spartacus, the TV show, to the people who actually lived in those days, be like, "Hey, look, I'm from the future. We made a TV show about it." And they'd be like, "Wow." And they'd be like, "Oh, this is realistic. Oh, look how badass they are." They would have eaten it up. So it was a great job. And it was in a style of 300. I don't know if anybody's ever seen the show, but it's all like on blue screen, green screen, and so it's all inside, and it's great. But it may be a genre. I don't think it's a genre that's going to last for that long. The whole over-stylized and taking so many liberties, because in the future people are just going to get more and more, you know, educated, and as people get more and more educated, they're going to become less and less tolerant of of stuff that's not totally realistic. You know, even how physically strong they are. You know, but it's true. Like gladiators were badasses. You know, like if they would have a gladiator go one-on-one against a Roman soldier, he'd kick his ass. especially like, you know, when these like reserve Roman soldiers and stuff. The hardened Roman soldiers, like Julius Caesar's Roman soldiers, those guys were basically like gladiators. They could kick some ass. I mean, those guys would march. They had two marching paces. They had forced march and then leisurely march. And I think on forced march, they could do like 15, 20 miles a day, hauling 15, 60-pound packs. And then once they fucking stop, they'd build huge trenches and build their walls and their whole camp. I mean, these guys were going all the time. But they were eating grain, so they weren't that big. But they were, you know, I'm sure they were really cut and everything. So, yeah, so let me just finish up the video really quickly talking about Spartacus himself, the real Spartacus, because it's a really interesting story. Yeah, like in how they portray in the show and in real life, Spartacus was an Illyrian, which is like modern day, I guess modern day Romania, more or less. Well, that was Dacia, but yeah, Illyria would have been like kind of, I guess, Bulgaria. Yeah. So they were kind of like, you know, barbarians, but he was in the reserves, so he was kind of one of the barbarians hired by the Romans. And anyways, they don't know what happened, but he was turned into a slave. So it's probably something, he had a disagreement with his handler and made him a slave, and then he rebelled. Now, one interesting thing is that was the third servile war, the third slave war. They had two before that, because it's a really fascinating example of what happens, and this is why you should study history, of what happens when you enslave people. Back in the days right before the third servile war, I think like a third of the entire country were slaves, and it happened and by accident. You know, I mean, originally you would kill everybody when you have a battle, and then you would take the slaves because that would be more humane, and of course you would take the slaves and make them your slaves to work for you. But the problem was that most of the slaves in Italy in that time, they weren't even they weren't like captive Germans like they portrayed in the TV show. You know, they're all like Agron's a German and Gannicus is a Gaul and all this kind of stuff. But in real life, slaves, most of the slaves were actually Italians, and it was kind of like this series of unfortunate events that just allowed the rich people to get even richer and richer and richer. Now, I don't know the details of it. I listened to it in I mean, it's all over the histories of Rome if you can read a book and remember it. But it's interesting. Just you know, one thing led to another. You know, rich getting richer and poor getting poorer, and next thing you know, just having bad laws, bad land laws, where they would have too high of an interest rate, and then they couldn't pay their land, so then they'd have to become indentured servants and slaves. And so then next thing you know, like 30 people are slaves, and of course they don't like it, and people don't like to be slaved. And so then of course 70 gladiators who escape are able to get 100,000 more out through the countryside and get 100,000 people to join their cause because they didn't want to be slaves and they hated Rome. And so of course after the servile wars, I'm sure they changed the laws and they made it so there were less slaves. And so to study the whole, and I should do a video about Spartacus or the Servile Wars in its own right when I can remember the details of it. But it's you know, that's what happens, dude. If you make poor people too poor, they're gonna rebel. It doesn't matter what country or what race or what situation it is. That's why you can't go to Mexico and not get murdered. You know, that's why. I think 70,000 people have been murdered in the drug war in Mexico since 2007. And a lot of that is just fueled by, and you know, kidnapping, all that kind of stuff. It's just fueled by people. You know, for example, what was that guy? He was on Howard Stern, the guy who was in charge of like the record company. You know, he was married to Mariah Carey. You know, he's married to Talia, and Talia's sisters were kidnapped, and then they caught the guys, and they weren't like professional kidnappers. They were just like homeless people. They literally like, I don't know, you know, and that's what happens. People just they'll rebel if the rich get too rich. So you know, expect it to happen. And that kind of seems to be where we're going. 20% richer now compared to everybody else since the 70s, and it's continuing on that way. And now it's just like our whole political system's all based around legalized bribery. You know, all the billionaires, they make their money not from how they originally got rich, but from investments. You know, so once you get rich, then you just invest. You just throw your money around to get even richer, and then there's people who just they can't even pay their fucking food, you know, and their rent, and they're working all the time. So then they turn into criminals and they fight, and then nobody trusts anybody. So anyways, so studying history is a good thing. A good thing is to find out, just to remind you what happens, you know. But the TV show was great. All the actors were fucking great. I loved the nudity. That chick Mira is so fine. Yeah, I really liked Spartacus. And then I recently got into Vikings, and I could do a whole thing about that too. But yeah, check it out. Check out Spartacus.